we got calls and people who are on those calls who want to talk to us. First off, we got Nate. Nate from Texas who is calling in to talk Heathen. Nate, what's going on?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Going good.
Good.
So the thing I want to talk about today is a little convoluted, so I actually took notes so I can keep my thoughts together here.
Thank you. We always appreciate that. We will never tell a caller not to take notes. You know what I mean? Like, it's always a good thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, when dealing with stuff like this, it's almost imperative, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
To the meat of my point. So we all know that, like, people will say that, like, philosophy degrees and such are, like useless to society. There's, like, a joke about that, right? They're like, oh, you have a philosophy degree? Okay. You know what I mean?
That's definitely a perspective people have. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing that bothers me is that I have met theists out there that have been purely convinced to their religion and gone from atheism to theism purely through philosophical arguments that claim to use logic and reason to get you to a God belief, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Over and over again, I hear these particular theists saying, you know, what's the best explanation? I want to believe the best explanation, right? Whereas, you know, maybe us, we would say, like, you got to show some evidence, you got to show some proof. But, you know, they claim that these explanations are the evidence.
Yeah.
So my question to you guys is, does pure philosophy without the scientific method, does it have any merit? Or is theists just connecting the dots to something that's not even tangible, right? I like the analogy of making a recipe with intangible items. Like, you make a cookie recipe with sugar, butter, invisible dragons, you know?
Yeah.
And when you put it all together, it tastes just like a cookie. It's great. But, you know, you could say, well, the invisible dragons were part of it, but did you really need them?
Sure.
You know?
This is an interesting and tricky question here, Nate.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're really asking about, first of all, I'm going to disregard this notion that that there's a philosophical method and a scientific method. I don't think that's right. I think what you're really talking about, and this is what I would, this is because of the philosophy education that I do have, that's quite limited, is that this is more of a debate between rationalism and empiricism, right? So empiricism being this idea that observations. We have to have knowledge through observations. It's through our senses that we're able to come to any kind of knowledge about reality. Whereas rationalists would say, well, it's actually coming from our minds. It's actually coming from our processes of thinking. Like, that's actually like kind of the real heart of it. You're able to have knowledge about things without any kind of sense observations. Of course, the classic example of this is René Descartes saying, cogito ergo sum, therefore I think, therefore I am, right? So, like, this has been a debate not just within philosophy. I mean, this is, first of all, a lot of the philosophers that we look at, when you look at the history of philosophy, we're Christians, but a lot of them are deists because even they realize sort of the problems that come with it. But they were going back and forth between whether or not you could actually have knowledge, whether knowledge was this sort of Aristotelian form, this sort of perfect idea that came from God and therefore just a rationalist position, or we had to know God's creation through the act of knowing the world around us through observation. Everyone, like, you can look at even the most hardcore, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, kind of Christian theologians and philosophers that will have differing opinions on this. So, like, I sometimes apologists will talk to me and they'll say, well, we don't have faith. Faith is actually this idea that we can build observations on things. It's like, I don't know if that's what Jesus actually taught. I'm pretty sure he was just like, no, you just got to believe it because you should, right?
Oh, yeah.
But like, this, I think when we do science, it is a result of a history of our philosophy. Like, philosophy informs why we understand the scientific method to be useful and why we know that it can work for certain things. Now, I'm not somebody who believes that science actually gives us knowledge about everything. Science so far has not given me any particular knowledge about my my intrapersonal experience, right? My internal world, right? That's purely from me. That's not because I read a paper. I'm like, oh, I understand who Dan is because somebody did some observations on me and they figured that out. Like, no, that's from me, like interacting with my body, right? And going through the world. So like, there's definitely knowledge that science, I think, doesn't touch, but it is incredibly useful for a lot of the kinds of claims that Christians and particularly religious folk do make. There are some concrete examples of things, like, for example, the earth flooding 6,000 years ago. Okay, that's something that is within the realm of science and can be observed and that we can look at. But other kinds of things like knowledge of God or knowledge of beings outside of our ability to be observed that may not be exactly answerable by science. So in truth, I think this question is a bit muddled. Hopefully I'm clarifying some of these terms here and what I think is really the debate being had here. Does that make sense, Nate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just wasn't, because I know that like philosophy in itself is a science and it does have merit. But it sounds like the way that they're using philosophy seems erroneous to me, and it's probably because I'm basing it on the fact that I'm more of an empiricist.
Yeah.
Versus what did you call it? I would call
rationalists.
It like idealist.
Yeah, I mean there is a rationalist tradition, right? And again, there are problems with empiricism as a foundation of knowledge, right? In the same way that there's problems with epistemology in the sense of like, okay, justified true beliefs are usually the systems by which most of us agree upon. But Gettier problems, if you've ever wanted to look at that, completely blows the justified true belief idea out of the water. But it's still useful to us. It's still pragmatic in the same way that empiricism is incredibly useful for us for building bridges and making space stations. But it may not be able to tell us, are there invisible dragons or invisible purple dragons out in the universe? I mean, like on the surface, it really can't. But that doesn't mean that we have to have a belief in those things. There's other kinds of methods of knowing things that we may have to look at, some of which may be studied and introduced by rationalist traditions of thinking. There's lots of people that have tried to meld these two things together with varying degrees of success, right? But like that's why philosophy is important. For us to even be able to qualify the terms in which we're talking about right now, again, you cannot have a scientific tradition without the history of philosophy. I think those things are intertwined. It really does inform how we know and interact with the world. And in today's world, we think philosophy is overrated, but really it is the foundation of a lot of what we do.
Yeah, we wouldn't have science today without the questioning of philosophy, for sure.
Of course, yeah.
So I guess my next question would be, is there a way to rationalize atheism, like an argument for atheism, that goes in the same method, rationalization for like the arguments for theism? Like theists, they all have like the contingency argument is the one I get hit up with a lot.
Yeah.
Or the cosmological. Like, do atheists have their own versions of that we could counter? Because I get into a lot of debates with theists all the time.
What do you think, Kelley?
I think the biggest atheist trope like that would be show me the proof.
Yeah,
show me the proof. If you're gonna make a claim like that, without that proof, I just simply am not going to believe it.
Yeah, I think what Nate is alluding to is this idea that we atheists, we often don't make positive claims.
Yeah, right.
So I think Nate is wondering, can we make a positive claim towards the belief of there being no gods? There are some atheists that think we can do this. I'm not convinced of this. One, I use the term non-cognitivism. Sometimes I talk about my understanding of my atheism because this idea of God is very loose to me. It's not very definable. I don't really know what that means when people are saying it, in the same way that people talk about the word spiritual. What the hell does spiritual mean? Anything can be spiritual. Your Reiki healer down the street can be spiritual. Your Pentecostal preacher can be spiritual. Your moments you had with your dog can be spiritual. Like that word is so loose, I really don't know what people mean by it. Same thing with God. God has had a history of meaning so many things, nature, a creator, whatever. Like it's so much. So I don't know if there's one particular argument that disproves and dislodges, every single theist claim that's ever happened, or even multiple kinds of arguments. I mean, like we really do try to think of atheism, at least in this community, as non-belief as a lack of belief. That's a pretty popular idea. And the disadvantage that comes with is we don't get to make the positive claims and say, look, there are no gods, and here's why. Here's my observations that demonstrate that there's no beings outside of ourselves. I don't think we can really do that.
I don't either.
If somebody has done it, I'd be interested in seeing it, but I just don't think that's something we could do. So that kind of puts us on the back foot sometimes because people think, well, if you can't argue that case, why do you believe it? And it's more so that I don't believe the other things people say about their gods. Right. I don't believe the specific claims people have made about the divinity of Jesus or the importance of the Buddha,
or Hare Krishna.
or Hare Krishnas. Right. It's like that's a little bit more complicated and a bit more nuanced, which is why it's hard to occupy the space that we're in. But that's all we can do. Really, we have to be honest with ourselves. Right. If we don't believe something, we can't say that it's true. So anyway, Nate, that's a very long answer. I hope I answered what you were looking for there.
Yeah, it definitely got me to think, it's like us atheists, we use empiricism to define ourselves, and we kind of, I guess you're saying it's a rejection of rationalism by saying, show me the proof, which I accept, of course, that I reject that. But when, these theists come to you with their rational arguments, they don't bring in all the extra baggage with all the, with the Bible, the Quran. They don't bring in all that extra stuff. They're just trying to get you to like either a deism or a general theism. So then they check you with all the crazy, right?
That is the general strategy you see with a lot of apologists today, where they do try to get you to that sort of ostensibly neutral position of deism that is divorced from the history of Christianity. Because every apologist they're Christians.
We just saw that with our first caller today.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if, to be fair, I don't know if Rick identified as a Christian. I think he said that.
No, he said, no, I meant the idea that we're trying to sneak in this. Well, you're right. You're right. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
That was just the idea of trying to sneak in that intelligent designer, right?
But if you look at the big names, I'm thinking of like Frank Turek, all these other folks, like they are Christians. At the end of the day, they are Christians. They believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead. They don't always argue for that, though. They try to argue from this point of view of, well, if we look at all of the evidence, if we know for sure whether or not this thing's happening, they get into the weeds here, but like they are Christians, and like that is something I think is, I don't want to say deceitful, but like I do imagine if I was a Christian, I think I'd try to do that too, right? I'd try to go for the more neutral points first. Like it just makes sense from like a marketing perspective.
Baby steps.
But it's like,
baby steps.
Salesman.
Yeah.
We'll get them little by little.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what it is. Because like most people wholesale, if they've never heard the truth of Christianity before, if they're encountering it for the first time, why would you believe that? Why would you believe like a guy rose from the dead 2,000 years ago? Like you just don't. Most of us believe it because our parents believed it, and we grew up in a church. That's like the story of Christianity today for most of us, But anyway, there you go, Nate.
It's like if I take your rational arguments, I could be a general theist or a deist, but then you're going to try and inject me with, the Bible and stuff, and well, now that you believe in a God, because you believe, now they're using that top-down logic, right? Like because you believe in God,
right?
Now he resurrected from the dead, Jesus Christ, and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll follow you. That really cleared a lot up for me.
Good.
I really appreciate it, guys.
I'm glad that cleared things up for you, Nate. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
I think I'm good. Just, keep fighting the fight, doing what y'all are doing. I watch like every week, so I really appreciate
Thanks for watching.
Done for me. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nate. We really do appreciate it, and we will keep on the fight there.
I wanted to say something really profound.
Sorry, Kelley. I was taking up a lot of that time
I wanted
there.
to say something really profound, and then following you, I felt like I was going to sound like an idiot. So.
No, I mean, I see this in the atheist circles. I see this idea, well, science is sort of king, right? Science kind of tells us everything. We should follow science to the nth degree. It tells us, and it's like yes and no. Like, yes, science has obviously given us an air-conditioned studio and audio equipment for us to broadcast to thousands of people around the world. That's great, and I'm not dismissing that. But this idea that, like, you can just solve any kind of argument with science, that is just demonstrably not true, I think. Like, you do have to engage in the topics of, as we talked about, traditions of rationalism versus empiricism, but also other schools of philosophy and thought that have informed the perspective that we have today. We would not have the modern scientific method without the consideration of epistemology, of how we know the things that we know.